And welcome back to Revving Up with David Ross. I'm your host, David, and I'm glad to be joining you here today. Looking forward to having a good time hanging out with you. Just me, myself today. Nobody in studio, nobody online. And going to keep it probably a little shorter than what I've been running. I do want to be more intentional about trying to keep these in that 30 to 40 minute time frame. They've been running up to an hour here lately. And so what I'll probably need to start doing is when I do have people that are on some really good topics, we'll just go ahead and split those out into multiple sessions, multiple weeks, and see what happens from there. But anyway, here we are. Happy Sunday. I record on Saturday or Sunday usually if I'm by myself, and then we release these on every other Tuesday. So we're glad to be here. And today I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle on a different topic than what I normally do. I've got several in mind around some things that God's been dealing with me about here in recent weeks and months. God is at work, and I'll just absolutely say that without any hesitation whatsoever. There are things happening in my life and in the life of some people around me that are absolutely going to be amazing when it's all said and done. Not all things are good in their season, but when you are able to step back and look at the whole picture, you can honestly say that he does work all things together for good. So I'm excited in many ways. I've been very frustrated for some time. I've been fighting some long battles, and I feel like there's been a shift. And I'll just go ahead and say this morning in service, our church is in the middle of a transition. We are being evicted, as we talked about with my pastor last time, a couple of weeks ago, that the property in which we've been renting, the landlord has passed away. The heirs are wanting to sell and divide it out, which is their right, and have no problem with that. But it's forced us to move in a little bit faster pace than we had wanted to. But in many ways, we've been waiting for 2 years to do something about this. And so it's like God said, time to go, guys. And so we're getting ready to do that. And so in preparation for that, there's been lots of prayer and lots of activity. I've got a work day scheduled for the men for Saturday, this coming Saturday, to go out there and clear some brush around the existing structures so that the construction crews that are going to be improving on those structures will be able to do so and get the equipment in around it and stuff like that. So got that going on. We got packing happening and stuff like that. And our founding pastor preached a message this morning, and it was the presence of God stepped in. And he basically said, how big of a miracle do you want? And he borrowed the story from Elisha is getting ready to die, calls in the king, and I've just dropped the name, just completely core dumped on it. And it's the story in 2 Kings where he tells him, he puts his hand on the bow and arrow, and he tells him that this is, shoot the arrow out the window. That's the deliverance of God that's coming to you. And he says, okay, now strike the ground. And again, the king in his confusion just didn't, you just got this promise from God. Are you going to act on it? And so he strikes the ground 3 times, and the prophet gets angry and says, you could have wiped him out, but you're only going to get to beat him 3 times now. And so he borrowed from that, and he also borrowed from the story of the widow woman with the 2 sons that were going to be sold into slavery for a debt, and the oil jars. And so the limit of the oil was not that it ran out. If you go back and read it, it says that the oil ceased when all of the vessels were full. And so that oil would have continued flowing until, for as many vessels as she could have had to fill, right? So how big of a miracle do you want? And God moved in. We had tongues and interpretation. We had a deep move. And I'm ever so thankful that God steps in those moments and says, I am with you. And he is walking with us through this season. It's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it. So we'll be coming to that at some point here in the near future. I'm still chewing on that and trying to figure out what I want to say around those things and some of the other things that's been happening. But one of the things that's come up, so here we go, diving into today's topic. One of the things that's come up, and I saw it come across my feed here recently. I turned 60 next January. I was born in 1967. And there's been a number of videos out on YouTube describing my generation and how we occupy a rather unique era, segment of time in world history, American history, and Western culture. in the way that many of us grew up. And so all of these videos have been out there describing what that's like. And I thought, well, gee whiz, I was there. I'm one of them, as Ben Kenobi told Luke, yeah, of course I know he's alive. He's me, So I'm like, I'm one of those guys, I'm one of that generation. And, it really got me to thinking, because they do talk about the psychological impact and what it's done for those of us that grew up in that era, especially people that were in my condition, where I had a single mom, and for much of that time as a kid, in my early teens, my mom remarried up to the time I graduated high school, and so, but for that window of time, from time I was 2 until I was about 12 or so, my single mom, my mom's parents lived in the same town I lived in, so I did have a good fatherly influence in my papa, and so and then Granny was instrumental in providing some stability and place for us to go. But I do also know that we were a unique generation in several aspects. So we were, and again, it's something that'll probably never happen again. Again, you say that. I don't see the circumstances arising again for these circumstances to happen, because the technology's changed and society's changed, and you'll never go back. But for a very brief window of time, some unique things came to pass, and I happen to be one of those that grew up in the middle of it. So I'm just going to describe. I wouldn't say I had a feral childhood. I had rules. I had boundaries. I wasn't left to my own devices all times, 24 hours a day. But we operated in a way. Let me just describe it to you, talk about it a little bit, and what what the psychologists say did to this generation as a result of that. So, born in 1967, Fort Meade, Maryland, and then now we pack up before I'm about 6 weeks old, and we move to a small town out on the panhandle of West Texas, Denver City, and lived there until I was almost 2, and then we moved to Andrews, Texas. So if you look it up on the map, look at the state of Texas, you've got the familiar panhandle, comes down at a right angle and shoots to the west to go over to El Paso, butted up against New Mexico there. And Andrews County is on the very bottom corner there in Texas, bumped up against New Mexico. And it's part of a very sparsely populated section of the country, and it was oil-filled country, and town of about 12,000. One high school, one middle school, and then 5 or 6 elementary schools. So small town by many standards. We had 3 or 4 traffic lights going down Main Street, a couple more around town, and that was it. Friday night football, the whole 9 yards, right? So I grew up in this smallest town, very small town. We lived on Northeast 4th. My grandmother and grandfather lived on Northwest 5th, so the town was divided into quadrants. And so I could easily, on a good Saturday afternoon, or during the summer especially, if I got on the loop, I could ride around the whole town on my bike in an hour if I wanted to just pedal it on around, right, as a kid. So that's where I grew up, and I grew up with my mom was a single mom, like I said, and so she was working a lot. And when we were younger, my Papa and Granny stepped in, obviously, to help take care of us, during the day when we weren't in school and stuff like that. But we were that latchkey generation, right? So you go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, and all time preceding that, there was almost, barring death or unusual circumstances, there were adults in the homes, right? Whether it was the mom while the dad was out working, or it was grandparents that lived in a home, aunts and uncles. You had a very much kind of a communal thing with many families living together in the same house or on the same compound. And so there were always adults present for children, and even around the world today, right? There's always an adult around in most situations. And if there's not an adult around nowadays, there's usually something wrong going on, right? Something bad happening. And so, but my mom was working. She worked for the post office for many years and other jobs. And so we were left to our own devices more so than, again, any generation ever will. And we're also pre-cell phone, pre-internet. And so there was not that immediate access to anybody that's available these days. And that's one of the reasons I think this will never happen again, because the concept of being disconnected in today's world is unheard of, right? You're always online, and people that don't have their phone with them all the time are the anomaly, right? One of my sons and his family, they try to spend every weekend away from technology. So at least on Saturdays, they try to put their phones away, and we're just going to be, and I'm like, that was life. Well, that was a big deal. No, that's how everybody was, because you had one landline in the house, and then once you left the house, you had no way of communicating with anybody for anything unless you stopped at a friend's house or hit a payphone or something like that, right? So no way of knowing where you were, no way of contacting anybody directly yourself, right? You could always find an adult or find in a business or something like that and borrow the phone and stuff like that. And so, again, I listen to the old Dragnet shows and the old radio, and they're always talking about, okay, well, we need to call it in the office. And so they would stop at a payphone, or they'd go into a pharmacy or something like that to call in and check in with the home office, right? Because nobody had any communication with them. So that was one aspect of it. And so we're left to our own. And so I remember, and again, I'm going to, I don't want to over romanticize, but I also want to point out the fact, we were left to our, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, many summer days were spent, my brother and I. Now, my sister was absolutely enthralled with my papa and granny, and rightfully so. And so many, many times she would be over with granny and papa. So my brother and I a lot were left home, but my sister was there quite a bit as well. And so mom would get up and leave to go to work, and summertime, and here we are. We are two brothers, sister, in the house by ourselves, and you're not going to watch anything on TV because all it is soap operas and The Price is Right, right? And so, what do you do? And so it was amazing. I look back now and I'm like, how did I survive? Number one, that I didn't kill myself on a few occasions, and just the absolute unfettered time to ourselves. We know what it's like to be bored. And I think that's something that needs to be relearned in our society. When you're bored, creative things happen. Sometimes not for good, right? But if you want to solve a problem, get bored, and you'll find things that need to be done. And I would read. I was reading. I got onto the Doc Savage and some of the other pulp fiction from the 20s and 30s, and so I would read a book or two a day sometimes, and we would go to the library and just check out books. And I read and I read and I read. Again, no video games, no game consoles. If you had a few quarters, you could go down to the corner store and play Pac-Man or Space Invaders or something like that. But if you only got $2 or $3 in quarters, when the money ran out, what are you going to do now? You have no money and you can't play your game anymore, right? And so had that aspect going on. The city pool was available. It was fairly close to our house. We lived in the same quadrant as the city pool, and so many summer mornings we would get up, have our breakfast, maybe if there's Three Stooges or something, watch the shows, and then we would head to the pool and go swim until sometime around after lunch, early mid-afternoon, when it started getting really hot. Go back to the house, read for the rest of the afternoon. Now, there was a boys' club also, so my brother and I would go shoot pool or play air hockey or something like that. So we would go to the boys' club to pass some of the time. And then there was just getting on your bike, getting with your friends out in the front yard, and just whatever you could think of to do. We ran races. I remember my brother got a stopwatch, and so for weeks on end it was races, and so it was timed races because we only had a few bikes among us, and so we would down the street, around the corner, down the alley. Again, we had alleys. I moved to Central Texas. I didn't know what to do without an alley behind my house, so we always had the alleys, that ran between it split the blocks in half, and so down to the corner, around, up the alley, come back around, back to the driveway, right? And so we would time each other. So we had races. We would do stuff like that. Out near my grandparents' house, they were right on the very edge of town at that time. And so across the one street headed north was a couple of houses, and then it was just open field beyond that. And there was a couple of big areas that had some, we probably kids had made them or something like that. There were some bike trails in there. And so we'd go ride bikes out in there. We would go find horny toads and play with the horny toads. And and very cool creatures. I love horny toads. They're fantastic little lizards. And so, we would, again, ride. I would ride one end of town to the other end of town, many times. Just what are you going to do, right? And then get with some friends at somebody's house towards evening. Hey, mom, I'm going to be at so and so's house. And sometimes as it got dark, get home. Sometimes after dark, ride home. And even up into high school, right? We, on Fridays and Saturdays, out with my friends. My mom had no idea where I was. She didn't know what I was doing. We were just out and about doing stuff, and I didn't get into drugs. I was not into drinking, and I wasn't doing anything like that. But pulling pranks, doing silly stuff. You'd find a buddy that's parked out in front of his girlfriend's house, and they're in the car, and we drive by, and the windows roll down a little bit. And so we come back around with, we happen to have an ice chest full of water, and so we throw this ice water on them as we go by through the open window, and just stuff like that. And so I look back at that, and I'm going, I was unattended, by myself a lot. My brother and I together times, but my brother would go off and do his thing. My sister was at my grandmother's, so there was many times I was there by myself. And we'd find things to do, and we would occupy ourselves. And if you hurt yourself, you took care of it. Mom always said, if there's no blood and nobody's dying, don't call me. And so even a little blood was not anything that merited a phone call to your mom. You didn't want to make her have to step away from work, or if she was carrying the mail route, she couldn't do it anyway. They had no way of finding her other than by tracing her route. So if there had been a real emergency, they could have found her. And so it was a time that, like I said, never will happen again. Every child today is connected from an early age, and I think from a too early an age, with the cell phone or something like that. There's always an adult around. The idea of leaving children at home by themselves will be considered child abuse these days. We're talking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old by myself, because mom couldn't afford a babysitter for all day long. And, Granny and Papa, I still know their phone number. And we talked about that last week with Jonathan, 33236. I could call up my grandmother at any time if something serious came up and I couldn't find my mom. If I needed to call home, it was 32957. I still know that number. And so I rode bikes. We played games. We built forts. I remember trying to create a kind of a tightrope, even though we never really did a tightrope, but we did string a rope between the two trees in my backyard, and spent half the day climbing, just traversing that, hanging from it underneath, going back and forth between the trees. There were some altercations among siblings and friends that happened from time to time. And it was amazing to me how quickly we got over that. I remember playing street football, and again, you don't know what playing football is like until you played in the street, right? So we're out there playing football, and you always had one of the younger kids or whoever's sitting out that play would be watching for oncoming traffic, and when you hear car, didn't matter what was happening in the play, you had to clear the road because the car is coming down the street, right? So got to get out of the way. So we would play street football, and then my buddy down the street, we got into a fight, and a few blows were exchanged. We both went to our house, and 30 minutes later, we're back out there playing again, right? Just got over it and went on about our business. Sunday afternoons in the fall, when the Cowboys are playing, we're all in watching the Cowboys. And then as soon as the last whistle or the gun sounded to finish the game, you could almost time, we'd be coming out the front door at the same time to play football, right? And have some fun. And I remember it was a really big deal when the Dallas Cowboys would have a show where they break down plays. And so they had a Monday night or Tuesday night thing with the coaches. And they would run the film backwards, right? They'd run it forwards and backwards to slow it down and stop it and stuff like that, just kind of show how this play was unfolding. And again, this was before a lot of this instant replay stuff. So to be able to see that in real time, they'd run the play and then they'd run it backwards and stuff. And so my friends and I, we'd get out there and we would do that. We would run a play and then we'd go backwards. We'd run the play backwards and run it backwards. And when we played it, I mean, just stuff like that, that what do you do when you're trying to entertain yourself, right? And have fun. And so I am so thankful that I did get to grow up in that era. I grew up before the internet. I grew up before cell phones. I grew up in a time where there was a number of us that were on our own at home. My buddy down the street, his grandmother lived with them. They were Hispanic, and so dad and mom were both working, but his grandmother was there. And I remember going to that house many times and getting tamales and all the great stuff from Abuela as she was fixing stuff for everybody. And so we would get food there. And I kind of had a route that I could take if I wanted to get food. My buddy's, his mom was a stay-at-home mom down around, not too far from my house. So you hit that house, you could get something to eat. You can go hit this other person's house around the corner and get something to eat. And then there was an older man that lived by himself that always had sandwiches or something like that. So like I said, you almost say feral, right? We were foraging, right? You go out and you're out playing and you're, oh gosh, it's, 10 blocks to the house. I'm hungry right now. And so you would find the closest person that you knew and do that. Or if I wanted to make the trip across town to go to Granny's house, I could, right? And go sit at Granny's house and get something to eat. And so find food to eat and things like that. And so what a time and what a place to grow up, to be in that environment, doing that, growing up that way, independent, learning to work things out for yourself, knowing how to prepare meals and to take care of things. So many times mom would, she didn't get the crock pot going before she left. She would call us, hey, start the sauce for spaghetti. So we'd put that together, put the beans in the crock pot and turn it on. I didn't get a chance to do that this morning. We would, fix ourselves food if there was food at the house. And I was, a somewhat feral kid. I had adults, I had supervision, but we'd go to the pool by ourselves and we'd go swimming. I mean, no parents or anything like that. Pay to get in, swim, get on our bikes, head home. I remember we went to go swimming one time, and my brother wiped out on his bike. He had a patch of loose gravel. They just got through paving the roads. And if you've never been on a road that's been tarred and graveled, you don't know what it's like. It's amazing what that'll do to cars. But anyway, hit some of the loose gravel there on the side of the road, and he opened up his knee. He hit it pretty bad, and so he couldn't do anything with it. And so I remember I'm pushing my brother home on his bike, and I'm running as hard as my little legs could carry me, and he's crying. He can't use his knee because it's opened up pretty good, and he's hurting. And so get him home. We do call Granny at that point, and then got him in to see the doctor. They cleaned it out, I don't think they needed stitches. They put a butterfly thing on it, and then away we went, right? So we had a few emergencies like that. I had one fight with my brother one time. It started in our front yard and ended up in the neighbor's backyard. I was losing the whole time, but I was not going to let it go. And because he'd hit a growth spurt and I hadn't yet. And so he manhandled me pretty good. And finally there's a baseball right there that it was laying in our neighbor's yard. And so I went to throw it at my brother, and I put it through the Ann's back window in one of her rooms. My mom's best friend that lived next door, she was an older lady that lived next door to us. And so I had to go apologize to Ann. We had to buy a new window and stuff like that. So that when the minute that glass broke, the fight was over because, number one, my brother was winning anyway. And number two, I knew I was in trouble, so there was no point in continuing this any further. So I broke Ann's window. And so that was good. Again, showing my age a little bit here. One of the things that TV series used to do, they always just kind of wrapped up a season and then they would go to the next season, in the fall, right? So, finish up in the spring, and then they'd have the reruns for a few months, and then you'd start up with the new season. Well, the one that changed all of that and set the standard for a lot of series from that point on was the TV show Dallas. And J.R. Ewing was the villain of the series. And so at the end of one season, he walks into a room and they show the gun in the hand. They don't show you who it is. And the gun goes off and, J.R. goes down. And that was the end of the series for that season. And so you had to wait 6 months to find out who shot J.R., right? And so that was kind of one of the first real big. It would have been viral. We would have called it viral these days, right? But that thing consumed the nation for 6 months. They were talking about it on news shows. They were talking about it on morning shows. They were talking about it in the newspapers. Who shot JR, right? And so you had to wait till the next season when they had that. And of course, a bunch of people tuned in to watch to see what happened there. So I remember that moment from my childhood. And then just, and again, a lot of people picked up on that. Hey, you can generate buzz about your show, and they'll talk about it even while you're not even airing any new episodes, right? So the cliffhanger from one season to the next kind of became something that became part of the culture at that point. So I was there at one of the very first ones that had ever happened. And so it was what a time to grow up. What a time to be able to experience life that will never be back again. Right? The internet is here to stay, whether it becomes Skynet and becomes sentient and we all end up doomed by AI robots and the Terminator or whatever. Those days are gone, right? The days of no cell phone, no communications immediately available, those days are gone. The days of not having immediate entertainment at your hands are gone, right? Again, if I'm not going to watch the soap operas, which I was not, I had to find out something to do. I had no chores to do in terms of like a farm or a ranch that, where I would have something to have to physically work at all day long. Because if you live in any rural life like that, there's always something to be done, right? So if we had been living on a ranch or a farm, there would have been animals to tend to, or fences to fix, or things to paint, or things to repair, or things to mow, or whatever, right? And so, as a child in the summer at that point, I would have been working. I would have been working around the property, and so we didn't have a lot of that, right? The house was pretty well taken care of. Took care of our room, and didn't have to worry about meals until the evening when my mom got home. So had that free time to just be a kid, to explore, to experience life, to learn how to relate with other people, how to figure out your differences without any adults around to make it happen. And I am a product of that. And so some of the studies that have come out looking at my generation, particularly those of us that were coming home to empty houses or living in empty houses during the summer, is that self-reliance, that ability that hesitancy to talk about ourselves. My generation, where I am on social media, I'm a lurker. I don't care to tell you what I had for breakfast because it doesn't matter. We faced bigger things and dealt with bigger problems and handled them and took care of them and went on with our lives. We don't have to announce to the world everything we've done. And I am also very thankful for a few of the things I did that were marginal, that those records are gone. There's no proof that it ever happened because there was not a video, there was not a recording, and there was not a picture to show anything that happened there. Again, I did not break any laws. I did do some annoying nuisance things that I did to some people in pranks and stuff like that. And, I made a couple of very foolish decisions. And thankfully, before Christ. And so the grace and mercy of God, it's under the blood and I can move on. Fortunately, I did not hurt myself too seriously. I did fall off the hood of a car one time. That's another story in and of itself. That was in high school. I remember here's a couple more, right? So again, high school even, right? Because you grow up in small town America, pre-cell phone, pre-everything like that, living in the middle of nowhere, right? So again, look at the maps, look at what happens out there in West Texas. It's a little town and there's nothing, right? So once we get past the high school, you hit the loop and there was nothing but oil patch beyond that. But all these roads to get to all of these pump jacks and drilling sites. And so we'd go out there and spotlight rabbits, potshot rabbits. We would run around. There's one road called Roller Coaster Road. Have a good old time going down that thing, bumping along. And again, we're just in regular cars. We're not even in 4-wheel drive cars, having a good time. But my buddy managed to get his car stuck. We were headed back in out of ammo, and a rabbit jumps across us. So he tries to run the rabbit over. So the rabbit hops over this little pipe, and he says, well, if the rabbit can, I can. And his 1973 Maverick, he comes over that first pipe, and when the body of the car hit that pipe, he knocked a module loose or something like that. The whole car went dead. Not like it just stopped running. It was all power, everything gone. No lights, nothing. And we're 2-3 miles out of town, out in the oil patch in the middle of the night. And we walked in. No cell phones to call anybody, right? And so here's 3 of us marching down the oil field roads, singing songs and marching in unison as we're making our way in, talking, laughing, having a good time. Finally get into town, get to the first friend's house that was there, make the phone calls, and get a ride home. And he had to go out the next day and tow his car in and figure out what was wrong with it. So that just won't happen again. That will never happen again in our society. And I just count it a privilege. We were all called, and God chose when I was going to be here. He knew who my parents were going to be. He gave me to them. He gave them to me, and He allowed me to grow up with the influence of a solid father figure in my grandfather, and my mom that was everything that a single mom could want to be in terms of trying to provide for her family. And she did what she could with what she had, and she did a good job, given the restrictions that were on her life. And then my brother and I and my sister managed to stay out of any serious issues with illegal substances or even legal substances and stuff like that during those years. And I am just ever so thankful that God had His hand on me even then. And so as I'm bringing this thing in here, I just wanted to share a little bit about where I'm at. And so, what compels somebody of my generation to start having podcasts and start trying to do this stuff? There's several reasons I started this podcast. One of them is that I do want to leave something for my grandchildren to look back to at some point when I leave this mortal coil, as the bard put it. And I want to have something that I can leave behind for them to remember me by. And so this is maybe one of those ways of telling the stories that Grandpa would tell. This is a pop story that I will share with my grandkids as they get older. But here it is codified, captured, so that they can come back to it at some point. And I just want to say I'm so thankful to God that He did keep His hand on me all those years. Never had anybody try to break in the house. We never were in any real physical danger other than, stupid boy things, climbing things we shouldn't climb or something like that. And God was good to me. And I am thankful to have been part of that generation, because I have a story that will never be told again. And I'm thankful for that. But, at the end of the day, we all have a story to tell. We all have a life to live. And we all have something that God has done in our lives that He would want us to learn from, grow from, and to share with those around us. And so as I'm bringing this in, I'm thinking of my father-in-law. He's in late stage Parkinson's, and we don't think it's going to be much longer. And I'm looking at this man, still sharp, but he's trapped in a body that's just given up on him. And I told him when I went to visit him recently that, God is with you in this. And I don't understand why He's allowed this to happen and why He is not healed. But He has something in it. And if you will walk with Him, He will walk with you, and He will take you through this. And this life is the longest part of eternity. Because when we get on the other side, time will cease to exist. So it's going to be eternity, but it's not going to have the same meaning it does to us now, because time will mean nothing in that land. And I'm looking forward to that. And so thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about who I am, why I'm the way I am, why I'm wired how I am, because I grew up in a time that was, I'm not going to over-romanticize it. I won't say it was magical, but it was unique. And like I said, I'm glad for that, and I'm thankful that it has helped shape me into the man that I am today. And then at the age of 18, God stepped into my life and transformed it all over again by filling me with the Holy Ghost. And He has been a faithful God for, coming up on 50 years. And that's just amazing for me to think about. 40, would it be 50? Yeah, so 40 plus years. I'm not quite to 50 yet. I'm not approaching 70. But for over 40 years, God has walked with me. And I'm thankful. So hopefully this was somewhat humorous. Hope you enjoyed it. A little bit about the Gen X generation, this generation, baby boomer, post baby boomer, early, born in the late 60s, grew up in the 70s and 80s before all the technology started blowing in our faces in the 90s. And it is what it is, and I'm thankful for it. So with that, I am going to wrap up this rambling chat talking about growing up feral, and we will be back to some probably more intense topics here in the next few weeks, because a few episodes, because I've got some things God's been dealing with me on, and I really think that there's some life lessons that can be brought out of that. I do have a few other people lined up for some talks. I do want to get my founding pastor of my current church in here to talk about his journey with anger. He just got through teaching a series on that, and I'm still wrestling with that, the dealing with anger. What right do we have to be angry? And I can see the transformation that I can sense it in him. And he said it took him a long time to get to this point. And so I think that would be a wonderful thing if I can get him in here to talk about. And so that would be a powerful subject. So got some good stuff coming up. So keep coming back, follow, share, all those things that we talk about when we start doing these podcasts. And with that, I'm going to wrap up today's session. Thank you for joining me on this journey. This is David Ross, and this has been Revving Up.